rotten apples and hidden promises. The wind carried the bite of late autumn, curling around Elena's coat and tugging at the ends of her scarf. Dry leaves scattered along the narrow dirt path, skittering toward the weathered fence that marked the edge of Caleb Hayes's land. Beyond it, his barn loomed, wooden boards darkened with hues of rain and sun, the high roof cutting a sharp line against a dull, pewter sky. Lily walked a few steps ahead, her small boots crunching over gravel. The market's bread rolls had sold out early, and her stomach had been complaining ever since. When her gaze caught a mottled apple lying in the grass near the fence, she darted toward it. "Lily, wait," Elena called, but her daughter had already scooped it up, turning it over in her mittened hands. The skin was pocked with brown spots, one side caved in where time and rot had claimed it. Still, Lily took a small bite, chewing slowly, her expression unreadable beneath her wool hat. "You'll make yourself sick," Elena murmured, stepping closer. She took the apple gently from Lily's hand, meaning to toss it aside. From the barn's open doorway, movement caught her eye. A man stepped into view, rolling his shirt sleeves to his elbows. Sawdust clung to the fabric, pale against the deep blue. His steps were steady, boots leaving prints in the damp earth. "You shouldn't be eating that," he said, not unkindly, his gaze flicking to the apple in Elena's hand. His voice carried warmth despite the chill, low enough that she felt it settle between her ribs. Elena straightened, unsure whether to apologize for trespassing. Before she could speak, the man shrugged off his coat, the heavy fabric falling easily into his grasp. He held it toward her, the lining faintly creased from use. "It's colder than it looks out here," he said. "Come inside." For a moment, she hesitated, glancing at Lily, who was already peering curiously toward the barn. The air smelled faintly of damp soil and wood smoke, but from within came another scent, hay, warm and golden, with an undertone of something sweet, like cut cedar. They stepped inside. The barn was dim, the light filtering through high slats and catching motes of dust that swirled lazily in the air. Stacked hay bales lined one wall, and in the corner, a workbench stood covered with wood shavings and tools, each neatly arranged. "Hey," the man said, reaching to a crate and lifting another apple, this one unblemished, polished to a deep red. He offered it to Lily, who accepted without hesitation. Her small teeth broke the skin, and juice ran over her fingertips. Elena adjusted the coat around her shoulders. The fabric was still warm from his body, carrying the faint scent of the outdoors, pine, perhaps, or the dry smoke from a hearth fire. She cleared her throat. "We were walking back from town. I didn't realize this was your property." "Doesn't matter," he replied. "Most folks just pass by. I don't mind company." His gaze lingered, not boldly, but as if studying something he hadn't expected to find. Lily settled herself on a bale, swinging her legs as she ate. The man leaned against the workbench, arms crossed now, the sawdust still clinging to the curve of his forearms. "Caleb Hayes," he said after a pause. "Elena Moore." She glanced at Lily. "My daughter, Lily." Caleb nodded, his eyes softening as they rested briefly on the child before returning to Elena. "You live nearby?" "A few miles down the road," she answered. "Old white house by the bend." He seemed to know the place, though he said nothing more. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the barn's loose boards, but inside, it was still, only the faint creak of the roof beams and the occasional rustle of hay under Lily's boots. They spoke in short, easy fragments, about the weather, the early frost, the trouble the market had keeping fresh produce this time of year. Nothing personal, yet every word felt like a thread pulling them closer. After a while, Caleb glanced toward the open doorway. "Sun's dipping fast. You should head back before the road freezes." Reluctantly, Elena rose. Lily finished the last of her apple, licking the juice from her fingers. Caleb walked them to the door, his stride unhurried. The cold hit them immediately, sharper now. Elena pulled the coat tighter around herself. Caleb didn't ask for it back. As they reached the fence, she turned briefly, her hand brushing the fabric again, as if memorizing the weight of it. Caleb stood in the barn doorway, framed by shadow, one shoulder against the wood. He lifted a hand, Not quite a wave, more an acknowledgement, and she nodded before continuing down the road. The coat was heavy, warm, and impossible to ignore. The coat at the window. The house was already dark when Elena and Lily stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of boiled vegetables and the faint, metallic tang of the old radiator. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a ledger spread before him. He didn't look up when they entered. "You're late," he said, his pen scratching against the paper. "The market was busy," Elena replied, setting her basket down. She hung Caleb's coat over the back of a chair before realizing how out of place it looked. Thicker, heavier than anything Thomas owned, its dark wool absorbing the weak kitchen light. Thomas's gaze flicked to it. Where'd that come from? It was cold. Someone offered it. He made a non-committal sound, already returning to his figures. Elena turned away, hiding the faint heat rising in her neck. Lily clattered about in the corner, washing her sticky hands in the basin, humming tunelessly. The sound filled the silence Thomas left behind. Dinner passed without conversation. The scrape of forks against plates was the only rhythm in the room. When Lily excused herself to her small bedroom, Thomas closed his ledger and pushed his chair back. "You've been wandering more lately," he said. Elena kept her voice even. "I walked to clear my head. That's all." He studied her for a moment, but if suspicion brewed in his mind, he let it pass. With a quiet grunt, he disappeared down the hall, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Later, when the house had settled into its nighttime stillness, Elena stood at the window overlooking the road. The coat remained draped over the chair, its folded collar catching the moonlight. Her fingers found the cuff, tracing the faint ridge of a seam, feeling the softness worn smooth by use. A trace of sawdust still clung there, gritty against her skin. She thought of Caleb's barn, the muted warmth, the scent of hay and cedar, the way he'd looked at her without hurry, as though she was not just another passing face in his day. The next morning, she folded the coat neatly and placed it in the basket with a week's bread order. Lily would come too. Her eagerness to see the apple man was obvious, though unspoken. By midday, the wind had softened, carrying the faint smell of distant smoke. The barn's wide doors were open again, sunlight slanting across the packed dirt floor. Caleb was at the workbench, planing a long board, his motion steady and unbroken. "You didn't have to bring it back so soon," he said, setting down the tool. "I thought you might need it," Elena replied, placing the coat on a bale. He smiled, not a show of teeth, but the kind of expression felt more than seen. "I manage." Lily darted to the crate, spotting more apples. Caleb handed her one without hesitation, then leaned a hip against the bench. "How's the road this morning?" "Less wind," she said. "Easier walking." They spoke in fragments again, safe words about weather, small-town shortages, the early frost. Yet beneath each pause was a quiet pull, as though each silence dared them both to step closer to something neither named. When Lily wandered to the far side of the barn to examine an old wagon wheel, Caleb's voice dropped. "Your husband, does he treat you well?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the dust motes drifting through the sunlight. Elena looked at her hands. "He provides." "That's not the same," Caleb said softly. Her pulse quickened, though she kept her posture still. "It's enough," she said, but the words felt fragile. Caleb didn't press, only nodded as if filing the answer away. When they left, Caleb walked them to the fence. His hand brushed hers when she took the basket, a touch light enough to deny if asked, deliberate enough to feel. That night, as she lay in bed beside Thomas, the coat was no longer in the kitchen, yet she could still feel its weight across her shoulders. Rain on the roof. The first raindrops fell just after noon, fat and cold against the dry dust of the road. By the time Elena reached the bend, the clouds had lowered, the air thick with the smell of wet earth. She pulled her shawl tighter, but the rain found its way in, soaking her sleeves, trickling down her collar. The barn appeared ahead, its dark outline blurred by the curtain of water. She hesitated at the fence, knowing she could keep walking and return home drenched, or step inside and face whatever had been building between them. Caleb stood in the doorway, one shoulder braced against the frame. The rain streaked down his hair, dripping onto the open collar of his shirt. "You will catch cold," he said, stepping aside so she could enter. Inside, the barn was dim and warm, the sound of rain drumming against the roof filling every pause. The scent of hay was stronger now, mingled with the faint tang of oil from the tools. "Lily's at a friend's," Elena said, her voice almost lost in the rain's rhythm. Caleb nodded, his gaze steady. "You should get dry." From a hook near the workbench, he took a clean shirt, soft flannel, worn thin at the elbows. She turned her back as she slipped out of her wet blouse, the fabric clinging before it let go. The shirt hung loose on her frame, smelling faintly of cedar and something unnameable that was entirely him. When she faced him again, he was closer than before, not enough to touch, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You don't have to keep walking in the rain just to find a reason to be here," he said quietly. Her pulse quickened. "And what if I'm not looking for a reason?" He reached out, his fingertips grazing the edge of his sleeve. "Then I suppose the rain's just an excuse." The air between them thickened, the steady beat of the rain slowing in her mind until there was nothing but the space they shared. She thought of Thomas, of the silence at the dinner table, the way he never noticed when she changed her hair, the absence of any touch that wasn't functional. She thought of how Caleb had noticed everything from the first moment, even the way she shielded Lily from the wind. His hand slid from her sleeve to her wrist, his thumb resting lightly against the inside where her pulse throbbed. She didn't move. "I can't," she began, but the rest dissolved as he leaned in, his breath warm against the hollow of her neck. The first kiss was slow, almost tentative, tasting of restraint as much as longing. The second had no such hesitation, her hands fisting in the fabric of his shirt, his arms closing around her with the certainty of someone who had imagined this for far too long. Somewhere in the barn, a drop of water fell into a puddle, the sound sharp against the hush. She pulled back, chest rising and falling too quickly, her lips tingling. "This can't happen," she whispered, though she knew it already had. Caleb didn't argue. He simply stepped back enough to let her breathe, though his hand lingered at her hip. "You will be missed," he said, and it was both a statement and a warning. She gathered her wet clothes, her fingers unsteady. The rain was lighter now, but the world outside felt different, thicker, as though it knew what she had done. At the fence, she looked back once. Caleb was still in the doorway, the shadows softening his outline. She thought he might speak, but he only lifted a hand in that same half gesture she had seen before. The road home seemed longer than usual, each step heavy with a memory of warmth she wasn't ready to name. The weight of an apple. The morning after the rain, the world felt scrubbed clean. The sky was a pale wash, the air sharp with the scent of wet leaves. Elena sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't yet sipped from. Thomas moved about the room with his usual measured steps, retrieving his coat, gathering his papers. "You've been quiet lately," he said, glancing at her without pause in his routine. "I'm tired," she replied. He adjusted his cuff and left without further question, the door closing with a muted click. When the house settled into its familiar emptiness, Elena rose and crossed to the window. The road stretched away in both directions, the damp earth still dark where puddles lingered. Her gaze followed it toward the bend, though the barn was far beyond sight. By midday, she found herself walking that way again. She told herself it was for the fresh air, but each step carried the memory of the rain-slicked day before, the warmth of a flannel shirt against her skin. Caleb was outside this time, stacking wood by the side of the barn. He straightened when he saw her, the faintest shadow of something unreadable crossing his features. "You came back," he said. "I had to." They stood in the open air, the damp ground soft beneath their boots. For a long moment, neither moved closer. "This isn't simple," she said. "It's not meant to be," he answered. His tone wasn't harsh, but there was a finality in it, a quiet understanding that what had begun in the shelter of the barn could not live easily beyond it. Inside, the light slanted through the gaps in the boards, striping the floor in pale gold. On the workbench lay an apple, deep red and without a blemish. Caleb picked it up and held it out to her. "For you," he said. She took it, turning it in her hands. "Not for Lily." His gaze didn't waver. For you. The weight of it was out of proportion to its size. She thought of the first apple, soft, spotted, something she'd taken from her daughter's hand. This one was different, perfect on the outside, but carrying the same quiet warning that beauty could hide its own rut. I don't know how to stop wanting this, she admitted, her voice barely above the sound of the wind outside. Caleb stepped closer, not touching her, yet close enough that the air between them seemed to shift. You don't have to answer that today. They stood there a moment longer before she turned toward the door. The apple remained in her hand, its smooth skin warming against her palm. The walk home felt both too short and too long. Each bend in the road pulled her farther from the barn. Yet the scent of cedar clung to her coat, stubborn as the memory of his touch. That evening, she stood in the kitchen slicing the apple. The knife's edge bit cleanly through the flesh, releasing a crisp, sweet fragrance. Lily wandered in, curious, and Elena offered her a slice without explanation. Where'd you get this? Lily asked between bites. Someone gave it to me, Elena said, placing another slice on the plate. They ate in silence, the sweetness lingering on their tongues long after the last piece was gone. Later, as the sun sank and the shadows stretched across the floor, Elena stepped outside. The air was cooling again, the light thinning to that fragile blue that comes just before night. She could almost picture the barn from here, even without seeing it. Its weathered boards, its open doorway, the man standing there with a half-raised hand that was neither a farewell nor a summons. The apple's core lay on the table behind her, stripped to nothing, yet she felt its weight still, as though some part of it had lodged itself deep inside. She turned back toward the house, the choice she hadn't made pressing as heavily on her as the one she already had.